The support for containers.
So Doug touched on this a little bit earlier. So we do allow you to run containers inside the system. For us, that's just a process that runs inside a VM. Today, we build the perimeter around the virtual machine. So today, we will support containers, but we won't be aware of multiple containers inside. I'll defer to Rob or Michael if you want to touch a little bit more on some thoughts on containers.
Today, we enable container support by running them inside a guest virtual machine and set the policies and the visibility and the security around that virtual machine. I think going forward from a roadmap point of view, what we would like to do is support containers natively to the point that we are able to do a rendezvous between the container orchestration system and our security policy and visibility system to the point that you know which container is running on the system and what exactly should be the policy that goes with that container. And as that container moves around, that policy and the visibility for that container will move as well. And I think that's something that, it'll take us a little bit of time to implement, but it's something that the SkySecure architecture can do very well. I also think it's going to be one of the key questions and key hurdles with regard to more mainstream container adoption, in particular within enterprise. Certainly amongst our enterprise customers, they love the notion of containers. Their biggest concern is, how do I secure them? I don't know how to secure them. I can't run all my environment as root. I mean, that might be okay in some environments and some shops, but in a Fortune 5,000 enterprise, that's not okay. So.
Hardware. Why do it in hardware? Why not do it in software?
That's another very good question. I'll take a crack at that, and then I'll let Rob chime in. I think from a market insertion aspect, doing the most secure implementation of the architecture first, we thought was best from an insertion, build a brand, build a business, and gain momentum. To do that, you need a couple of things. You need hardware root of trust. Yeah. Actually, I would argue you need redundant hardware root of trust, which is why we have TPMs. Yeah. And then you need provenance over the manufacturing and the supply chain. Right? And that gives you the most secure, most reliable security foundation, and hence allows us to insert and do the best job we can with regard to securing critical assets, critical infrastructure, and critical workloads. Again, as I look at the roadmap, getting to fully virtualized, fully software driven solutions will open up the market and open up the applicability of this kind of solution. And we will do that. I think it's going to require a couple of things because you still need some root of trust. You need it somewhere, right? And whether you get that through a mainstream orchestration system and or an OEM server and or a cloud instance, at some point all of those solutions will be able to offer a root of trust. And once that is there, we can anchor the SkySecure visibility and security and policy layer on that anchor and hence be able to secure workloads in different form factors.
So let me try and break that down. You said two things. One is, with a hardware platform, you get hardware trust, so you get 100% guarantees that the root is created.
Yeah.
And the second one is that the customers are ready to buy hardware today, but software will be tomorrow, but you'll be ready tomorrow to give a software-only solution over time.
That's exactly right.
Right. So you started where the market is, and you're going to where the market's going.
Exactly.
Right.
Can I automate deployment?
Here. I'll let you take a crack. Automate deployment of what? So the box
experience. Of VMs on a Skyport platform.
Okay, so everything is API driven, right? Okay. So literally the issue is going to be automate it from what orchestration system? So our API looks vaguely like the AWS API. We didn't settle on cloning an existing API. Because of our policy layers, which don't really have an analogy to any of the other services, it's not very easy to do, take that API and basically extend it. But you could automate and integrate us with OpenStack. You could integrate us. The question is which one? There's 10 different orchestration systems at this point. I mean, the answer is yes with glue. Everything comes down to glue code, so it can be done. Not sure if this is a great answer, but that's the answer.
There's an API there. It's publicly available to the customers. It's
Correct.
Documented.
Yes.
And anybody that wants to could
Correct.
integrate it into whatever their orchestration
Exactly
platform
right.
might be.
Yeah, exactly.
Some work, but
we do this in testing, right? So for our own purposes, we have to automate all of this. So we don't automate it by automating web clicks, right? We have large scripts that basically do everything via the API. So we're probably the heaviest API user right now, other than the UI itself.
And the UI itself then is also API.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's a religious thing. The UI has to use the API. You can't have backdoors or other schemes to make that API work. It's just yeah.
I have one more comment on the system. On the system question of why start with a system. So in addition to the points that Michael and Rob made, another key thing we saw is some of the technologies we're using, like some of the lower level TPM TXT. While there's been a lot of talk about this being out there for years, it's not as mature as many people would have you think. And trying to make that work generically across, especially at this stage, across any system, any architecture, we've clearly seen not going to happen. We see when we saw Broadwell come out, we did see some early things that we need to work with the system vendor to get working properly so that we could fully do the attestation properly, and as we look forward to next systems. Now, longer term, there may be different class of customers for us that aren't as worried about that part, and then having a mix of the product line. But to Michael's point of doing the first thing very well, we saw that the system base was very important. It also helps early on support-wise as we get the storage side, we get into back restore, all these kind of things. Having a set system that we can start with and then repeatedly support helps us grow.
Is there any interest in integrating the network path between Skyport boxes, enforcing policy, et cetera?
It's an interesting question. It's certainly an area that we can look into and develop, and I think it's very powerful. You certainly see other technologies have emerged where systems can self-organize and cluster, and that's very value added. By our nature, the integration is pretty straightforward with regard to independent SkySecure servers and compute nodes, and can be very powerful for a multitude of different reasons, for reliability, for geofencing, for pool management, and so forth. So it's something that is very interesting for us going forward.
So I had two questions. The first is money. What's the cost of this wonderful platform compared to a regular server? Define what that is. I couldn't see anything on the website indicating the kind of specifications of device you can buy and that kind of thing. So it was very hard to get a guesstimate of where it might fall. So I guess that's the first one. The second one is unrelated, but whenever you have a security product, at the end of the day, as customers, we have to trust somebody. In this case, we're trusting you guys. Just curious, how do you protect your own dev environment from, let's say, the NSA or somebody
I'll take
foul of the problems that certain other people have fallen foul of recently?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of that one, which is we actually price. Interestingly, we're coming. Yeah, I'm visible. I'm perfectly fine, and I'm like, I know what I'm doing. I got this. That one sees me. It's pointing right at me. All right. So we actually priced the product as it's an initial incarnation as a service offering. The reason for that is I have a separate mic over here. The reason for that is we know that Intel is developing SGX, TPM 2.0 is coming out. There's enough hardware investment in security that's coming over the next 2 to 3 years that our current goal is to offer our customers basically best-in-class security capabilities and an ongoing service of managing multi-terabyte log structures and frankly maintaining cryptographic libraries, automatically upgrading those, doing secured BIOS pushes. Actually, it was like 3 weeks ago we did an over-the-air BIOS upgrade of a signature signed BIOS for every server we have deployed. So there's an absolute service component. So we adopted an evergreen hardware model. Currently what that means is the list price, and list is always wonderfully negotiable, is like $2,500 per month per server. That would host the equivalent of 8 to 12 Amazon M3 larges. You'd find that to be very cost effective when compared with any cloud hosting service for reserved instances of that amount. Especially if you look at the security-focused ones like VirtuStream, Firehose, some of the more advanced capabilities there, roll it up. We find we have a comparable to compelling price in that range. But what it also means is at the end of a 3-year contract, if the customer renews, they get an automatic hardware refresh. So they're buying a security capability and an amount of compute capacity. Roughly every 36 months, that compute capacity will follow Moore's Law and be upgraded for the customer. Let's just bring best-in-class hardware security capabilities to bear for them as well.
That's critical to keeping the TPMs up to date as well.
You got it.
The hardware itself will become insecure over time.
And to be very frank, there's a benefit to us, just, sort of like, full openness on it. Will doesn't have to support 16 years of legacy hardware, 15 years from now when we do that, right? It means that we're controlling that experience as much as possible. And we can be much more current on new feature development and not have to support 10 years of legacy product, in a future perfect world. The last part of that is that...
I was going to say the same thing, but you were reading my mind. So I appreciate that.
Appreciate it. Yeah. We have a close engineering, product management, marketing relationship here. The last thing I'd say with that is, we are going to look at other options for customers as well in pricing, packaging of it. But for right now, we want to keep it, again, kind of to Dan's point, as simple as possible, relatively fixed price, and move that forward for customers.
Okay, thank you.
Second question was, how do I keep the NSA from contaminating my code with backdoors? Is that
As a
the
random
actual
example,
question?
yeah.
So we use, so internally, let's be honest, right? Your quality of your vendors is your main point. Like everyone in engineering, so let's start with like the basics of how you do an engineering organization that you can trust. So A, you shouldn't trust us. A, you should probably ask us to see some of our code. You should probably ask us to look at pen tests. You probably shouldn't trust us, but more importantly, you shouldn't trust any single layer from any vendor. So part of the reason our system sounds a little overly complex or baroque is that we've gone really obsessive into doing layers. The proxies run inside a network compartment and talk to DOM0. DOM0 runs the receiving end of those things inside, essentially pseudo-jailed. And then those things in turn talk to the service. Like we have paid infinite amounts of attention to the idea of managing when tainted data flows into the system and making sure that when tainted data is handled, it's handled very carefully. So and then in addition to that, we have a separate IO controller that then acts as a vetting agent to actually verify that the thing that is actually the control of the x86 is itself not entirely trusted. And they don't trust each other. We could go through a really long discussion about how I actually arrange for the x86 to talk to the IO controller, because they don't trust each other. In order for them to trust each other, first, they have to talk to the cloud service, and the cloud service gives them each a piece of private information to allow them to establish communications. So the answer to trusting us is that, like, does our architecture make sense from a trustworthiness standpoint? Does it smell secure, or does it smell like an antivirus software that'll let you run arbitrary JavaScript from the internet? So the second thing is we run a very small...
That hasn't happened recently, Rob?
That was last week.
Yeah.
We have a very small engineering organization. They all sit in one building. So all of our coders sit within arm's reach of each other. We can go yell at each other. We can see what each other is doing. All of our code, we're moving towards a model where every commit that goes into our tree is signed. Our code is maintained offsite by a third party so that we can actually have an audit trail that means something, so a rogue system administrator can't patch it. All of that's great. Like, we use robust coding. We are very careful in our choice of languages. You should trust us because we're willing to have this conversation with you in any level of detail that you actually want. And I think that goes for every customer that we'll engage with for the next 12 to 18 months, because that's just how it is. You shouldn't trust anyone. You should actually make them kind of prove it. That said, like okay, now you should just believe me, we do an amazing job of actually locking things down. We are obsessive about every phase of how does data enter the system? Is this data tainted or untainted? Do we trust the northbound system? Do we trust the southbound? Do we trust north of us or south of us? Everything on our system is signed in both directions. Everything is using frequently rotated keys. Everything is using remeasurable objects. So the pointers in our system are SHA-2s. The SHA-2 is the SHA-2 of the object itself. So we build out Merkle trees of SHA-2s, which allow us to basically say the root of the tree looks like this, and thus all of the contents have to be correct. Otherwise, we'll immediately detect it as an invalid structure, and it won't work. As for keeping the NSA out, it's not possible. It's reality.
One quick addition to what Rob said. So with all that focus on layers that Rob has been driving for several years, one of the things that has required a lot of focus from the engineering team is then how do we get the flip side of that, which is supportability, visibility, ability. And that's something where, things in my past lives at companies like Cisco and Juniper, things that could have been done, have an engineer go work out how we're going to do this aspect of a support in a week, is 3 months. And so that's been something we've had to invest on, over the last 2.5 years, things that allow to strike that balance between security layers as well as supportability. And so it's an ongoing challenge and something that we do put a lot of focus that I don't think you'll see other vendors thinking about this closely.
and to probably prove it, a really good point, I've never once been authorized to log into the production employee network at this company. I've only ever used the guest network, which has the incredibly long, literary reference.
What do you think they're trying to tell you, Doug?
I'm saying it's like the entire management access for the cloud system is truly fully air-gapped, and then they use the secure administrative workstations that are fully logged to do anything. And if a customer, in order for our customer support team to provide support to a customer, the customer has to go in and grant our employee access, which is a time-bound access, that then everything they do is logged. And the customer sees that user Ryan administered their system and helped them with this problem, and this is every single thing Ryan did while administering the system, where he came from, and so on. So trying to log everything and make, so if you think like, what is the ultimate managed services capability, try to build that in as the default way the system works as opposed to the exception.
What are you guys doing, if any, in the open source community to sort of get ahead of some of these issues? As we've seen with, for instance, the OpenSSL project, a lot of these problems stem from sort of a systemic issue from the community, at large. So are you guys doing anything there to help stem that off?
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly, we use a fair amount of open source internally in our environment as well as inside the product, and it's been incredibly valuable to us and to the overall ecosystem, but comes with some downsides. We do an awful lot of testing with regard to those open source packages, and when we come across defects and whatever, we feed that back into those projects. I would say, out in the middle term, I would want us to be much more active with regard to actually driving and steering where some of those projects are going to go, over the middle term to get to a better balance between productivity and ease of use and security and visibility and reliability of those packages. I don't think we're quite there yet, but that's certainly something where we're steering towards. Will, if you have anything else to add to that?
We should throw out that we also fund, there's a couple of places where we actually are actively funding them. So I don't know if anyone noticed, but like GRSec, for example, was running into lots of financial issues. So we obviously use that code, so we are helping to fund them. And so that's part of being a good citizen. It's just an ethical thing to do.
I agree.